Anyone who uses and endorses the term Islamophobia as legitimate is behaving like a useful idiot in service of Islamists and jihadists. I'm Jürgen Rasmussen, and this is a response video to the latest episode of Piers Morgan Uncensored. The episode is titled Global Scandal. Mehdi Hassan and Gad Saad talk about grooming gangs, Tommy Robinson, and Elon Musk. In this particular episode, Piers Morgan, the host, tries to have an even handed, fair, and rational discussion about grooming gangs and police cover ups by inviting people with diverse views on the subject, such as Gad Saad and Mehdi Hassan. But Piers Morgan totally screws up by using and endorsing the term Islamophobia and even accusing Tommy Robinson of being an Islamophobe. Why is this a problem? Well, first of all, let me say that I'm not accusing Piers Morgan of being an idiot. He's probably quite smart in many ways. What I am saying is that he's behaving as a useful idiot in this particular context. Now, what's the problem with the term Islamophobia? Well, it's a term used by Islamic activists and apologists, and the purpose of the term is to frame any criticism against Islam as evidence that there's something wrong, dysfunctional, disordered, or irrational, phobic about the thought processes or mind of the critic. It's a way of trying to frame disagreement and dissent as evidence of disease or illness. Remember, we humans understand words in terms of frames. So if I throw out a word like phobia, where the general understanding of that term is irrational fear, it has a tendency in the listener to activate similar concepts such as treatment, sickness, perhaps chemical imbalance, trauma, treatment, psychiatrist, patient. It's a way of kind of dismissing the critic or the criticism as irrational, as something that no one should really take seriously. It's also a way of trying to criminalize dissent, which is very common these days in Keir Starmer's police state. Now, so remember this, disagreement is not disease. In psychiatry's ugly history, remember that psychiatry in many ways functions as a means of social control on behalf of the state. And quite often, ways of thinking, worldviews, personality tendencies, and behaviors that the powers that be don't like gets branded as evidence of disease. This happened with dropatomania, masturbatory insanity, just being gay a few decades ago, right? So, but so disagreement again can never be disease, nor can it ever be evidence of disease. It's a completely intellectually dishonest term, which makes it so that people never have to actually deal with the criticism, because you could just brand people as irrational and phobic and as racists and as driven by hatred. Now, here's the thing though, if you love freedom, if you love Western values, there's nothing irrational or unreasonable about having a deep concern or even fear about the effect of mass immigration on Western societies of people from Muslim majority countries, because we know Again, taking numbers from Pew polls, of Muslims around the world, like 10% of them approximately are jihadists, 10% of them approximately are Islamists, uh, another 40% are conservative, and the rest are more or less liberal. So since 9/11, around 46,000 terrorist attacks in 70 countries have been committed by people who have been motivated by Islamic texts. And if you look at the grooming scandal, rapes, and cover up in Britain, it's estimated that this has happened in up to 50 cities. And in cities like Rotherham alone, between 1997 and 2013, it's estimated that around 1,400 white British girls, primarily, were groomed, drugged, and raped by British Pakistani Muslim men. Not only did this go on for decades in this town, but an official investigation into it has revealed that the police and social workers basically stood by and let it happen in fear of rocking the multicultural boat and in fear of being branded racists. When people use the term Islamophobia, it's also very often used to kind of confuse and make it seem as if what the critic of Islam, which is a political, religious, totalitarian ideology, that if someone criticizes that, it really means not only again that they're phobic, but that they're racist and that they're driven by hatred. Now, of course, someone who criticizes Islam might be racist or might be driven by hatred, but it's completely unfair and it confuses the matter if you're going to assume that anyone who does that is automatically really driven by racism or hating human beings. And it's using these terms and accepting this way of thinking that largely has contributed to scandals like what happened in Rotherham and up to 50 other British cities. And of course, Piers Morgan then is really screwing up by legitimizing and using this term. So when he accuses Tommy Robinson of being an Islamophobe, Tommy Robinson has been criticizing Islam as an ideology. That's what he's doing. And he's been right about the grooming gangs and the cover-ups. But again, this term kind of implies that there's something wrong with his mind for doing so, and that what he's really doing is hating human beings or hating a group or trying to oppress someone. But that's not at all what's going on. So first of all, using the term Islamophobia is intellectually dishonest. B, it contributes to distorted thinking. So one thing that cognitive behavioral therapists do with their clients who depress and who anxietize is that they very often help their clients to identify and to dispute various so-called thought distortions. And one example of this is what is called emotional logic. Now, the nature of emotional logic is that I use my emotional state as sole evidence of what someone else might be thinking or doing or intending. So if I'm angry, then the very fact that I'm angry alone is evidence that I'm being treated unfairly or disrespected. Or if I'm scared, the state of fear itself is evidence that I'm somehow in danger. But it's not. This is fuzzy thinking. These are exactly the types of thought distortions that people are taught in, you know, Albert Ellis's rational emotive behavior therapy or Beck's cognitive behavior therapy to identify and to dispute, to anxietize less and to depress less, right? But these types of terms encourage emotional reasoning because the very fact that someone feels deeply offended when their religious and political beliefs get criticized is now encouraged. The folks are now encouraged to view that as evidence of hate in the critic and racism in the critic. Their own feelings as sole evidence of that. It also encourages personalization, meaning, what happens is that people tend to very often identify with their religious and political beliefs in such a way that when you criticize those ideas, people will very often interpret that as an attack on them as human beings. But again, something else that a good CBT or REBT therapist or any good psychotherapist, coach, or agent of change will aim to help people to make distinctions between criticizing an idea and damning an individual. It's not the same thing. But if we're going to be able to have a free and open society, we got to get better collectively. We got to train ourselves and also help other people to make distinctions between criticizing ideas and damning and attacking human beings. And by endorsing these terms like Islamophobia, adopting the vocabulary of the Islamist activists, it encourages personalization and emotional reasoning and intellectual dishonesty. It makes people more hypersensitive. It has contributed to the United Kingdom and many other countries developing a culture where protecting the feelings of believers of Islam or Muslims as a group has become more important than protecting white British girls from being drugged, raped, and abused by the tens of thousands. It's not a healthy culture. Does not contribute to something good. We fail to make distinctions between words and language. We've ended up in a place where we criminalize speech. But of course, what really distinguishes a more free or democratic society from a dictatorship is that in the latter, thoughts, if they're expressed, are crimes. And that's what we have been doing. If you look at Western countries, criticizing Islam these days very often gets branded as examples of hate speech, and it gets criminalized as a hateful attack on the believer. This is irrational, fuzzy thinking at its worst. And it's a form of dehumanization because if you take away people's right to speak, to think, to express their minds, to criticize ideas, you are dehumanizing them in a way. Remember, you're not safer by knowing less about what people really think. And finally, it's utterly hypocritical because it's only when it comes to ideologies. Remember, Islam is not a group, it's not a race, it's a set of ideas. Criticizing a set of ideas is not evidence of hate against people or even a group, right? So it's utterly hypocritical in the sense that someone can criticize Christianity or Buddhism or capitalism or communism all day, but you don't get charged with hate speech. You don't get, it doesn't get implied that you're suffering from a mental illness by using terms such as Islamophobia. There's no Christophobia or Buddhistophobia or capitalistophobia. Only when it comes to ideology has Islam become something that should be protected at all costs. And I do suspect that it's not compassion or virtue that is behind this, but it's fear. Masqueraded, it's fear, but people talk about it as compassion and having a good heart, but it really is a fear of ultimately being beheaded. So anyways, I hope this video was useful. Thanks for listening. And at the end, at least kudos to Piers Morgan for bringing Gad Sad on. That was awesome. But Piers Morgan, if you happen to listen to this, please do no longer continue to use and endorse the vocabulary of jihadists and Islamists when what you're intending to do is to have a fair, balanced, even-handed, and rational discussion. Thanks for listening.